The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor Reynolds knelt beside the wounded soldier. Blood seeped through her fingers as she applied pressure to the jagged wound. 27 years old with auburn hair, pulled back in a tight regulation bun, she looked almost too young to be wearing combat fatigues. But her hands, those steady, unwavering hands, betrayed years of battlefield experience. "You're gonna make it, Jackson," she whispered, her Texas accent thickening under stress. "Just stay with me." The soldier's eyes, glassy with shock, locked onto hers. He nodded once, trusting her completely. That trust was Eleanor's burden and her honor. 200 yards away, gunfire erupted as insurgents made another push toward their position. Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that hesitation meant death on the battlefield. Instead, she worked methodically, her movements precise, as she administered morphine and packed the wound with hemostatic gauze. The medical helicopter appeared over the ridge rotors, churning hot desert air into violent swirls of dust. Only after the wounded were loaded did Eleanor allow herself to exhale. Another life saved, another soldier going home to his family. Captain Morris approached as the helicopter lifted away, his weathered face etched with the lines of too many combat deployments. "That's the fourth life you've saved this week, Reynolds," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. Command noticed. Eleanor wiped blood-stained hands on her uniform before accepting it. "New orders," Morris explained. "Special assignment. General Parker wants to see you at 0800 tomorrow." She nodded, tucking the envelope into her pocket. Special assignments usually meant danger, the kind that required someone with her particular set of skills. The thought should have troubled her. Instead, she felt only the quiet certainty that this was where she belonged. That night in her quarters, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bunk and opened the envelope. The mission brief inside was sparse, classified beyond her current clearance. All it contained was a time of place and a cryptic designation, Operation Desert Shield 2. As she prepared for bed, her gaze lingered on the photo beside her bunk, her father in his marine dress blues, silver star gleaming on his chest. James Reynolds had served 3 tours before taking a sheriff's position in their small Texas town. He died when Eleanor was 16, not in combat, but during a routine traffic stop gone wrong. The irony wasn't lost on her. Survived war only to die at home. She joined the Army to pay for medical school, but somewhere along the way found purpose in battlefield medicine. There was clarity in combat that civilian life lacked immediate problems with immediate solutions. Save or lose. Live or die. No bureaucracy, no insurance forms, no hospital politics. Just people who needed saving and the skills to save them. The next morning, Eleanor reported to the briefing room at precisely 0800. Inside, she found not General Parker, but Rear Admiral James Harrington. At 68, the Admiral remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with silver-gray hair cut in the same military style he'd worn for nearly 5 decades. His weathered face spoke of years spent in harsh environments, and the scars on his hands told stories of battles long past. "Reynolds," he said, motioning to a chair. "Have a seat." Eleanor complied, sensing this was no ordinary assignment. "Your record is impressive." Harrington continued, opening a file folder. "Distinguished Service Cross for action in Mosul. Combat Medical Badge with 3 stars. Advanced Tactical and Sniper qualifications." He closed the folder, fixing her with a penetrating stare. "Your father was Captain James Reynolds." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "I served with him during Desert Storm. One of the finest men I ever knew." Harrington's voice held genuine respect. "He saved my life near Basra." This was news to Eleanor. Her father had rarely spoken about his service. "Sir, may I ask what this assignment is about?" Harrington activated a wall screen displaying satellite imagery of a compound nestled in northern Arizona's rugged desert landscape. "We've identified a terrorist training facility operating on U.S. soil," he explained. "Intelligence suggests they're led by a high-value target codenamed the Professor, Nikolai Petrov, former Soviet bioweapon scientist thought dead since the end of the Cold War." Eleanor studied the images, noting the compound's defensive layout. "The facility appears to include a medical structure," Harrington continued. "That's where you come in. 3 weeks ago, we sent in a SEAL team to conduct surveillance. They missed extraction and went dark." He enlarged an image showing a building on the eastern edge of the compound. "Recent thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in the medical building. We believe at least some of the team may be alive, possibly wounded or worse." The implications hung heavy in the air. Captured special operators represented not just a personal tragedy, but a national security nightmare. You'll be attached to SEAL Team 7 for this recovery mission, Harrington said. Your combat medical experience makes you uniquely qualified if we find survivors in need of immediate treatment. Eleanor processed this information quickly. When do we deploy, sir? Tonight. You'll meet the team at 1400 hours for briefing and equipment check. As she rose to leave, Harrington added, Lieutenant Walker is leading the operation. He's one of our best, but... He paused. David Mitchell was commanding the missing team, Walker's former CO and close friend. This is personal for him. Eleanor understood the warning. Emotions, complicated missions. I'll keep that in mind, sir. At precisely 1400 hours, Eleanor entered the Tactical Operations Center. 5 men in desert camouflage looked up as she arrived. The tension in the room was palpable, the silent assessment of an outsider entering their close-knit world. Lieutenant Jason Walker stepped forward. At 40, his face carried the weathered look of countless deployments lines around eyes that had seen too much a jagged scar along his jawline and the hyper-vigilant posture that never quite faded after years in combat zones. You must be Reynolds, he said, his voice neutral, but his eyes skeptical. Yes, sir, Eleanor replied, standing at attention. Combat medic Eleanor Reynolds reporting as ordered. Walker studied her for a long moment. At ease. We don't stand on ceremony here. He gestured to the other men. Mark Thompson, our sniper. Thompson, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair, gave a curt nod. His hands, steady and scarred, were those of a man who made his living waiting for the perfect shot. His piercing blue eyes seemed to catalog her weaknesses at a glance. Alex Ramirez, communications and intelligence. A younger man, maybe 32, with an alert gaze and quick smile. My sister's an ER doctor, he offered. She'd like you. Daniel Walsh, our explosives expert. Walsh was built like a defensive lineman, broad shoulders, powerful hands that looked capable of bending steel. Despite his intimidating size, his voice was surprisingly gentle. Good to have a real doc with us this time. And Mike Brennan, weapons specialist? Brennan, red-bearded and stone-faced, merely grunted. His expression made it clear he considered her presence an intrusion. Walker moved to the tactical display. Let's get to business. The mission briefing was comprehensive. The target facility, a converted ranch in the remote desert, housed approximately 25 hostiles with military training. Intelligence suggested at least some were former Eastern European special forces. The compound included barracks, training areas, weapons storage, and the medical facility where thermal imaging indicated activity. Our primary objective is personnel recovery, Walker explained. Secondary objectives include intelligence gathering on Petrov's operation and, if confirmed, his bioweapons research. Eleanor studied the compound layout, noting something unusual. The buildings are positioned defensively, she observed. Multiple fields of fire overlapping coverage. That's not standard for a training facility. Walker glanced at her with reluctant approval. Correct. They're expecting trouble. Thompson, the sniper, spoke up. The medical building has reinforced walls and fewer windows than standard construction would dictate, designed to contain something or someone. The implications hung in the air. If the missing SEAL team was being held there, their situation was dire. Insertion is at 0200, Walker continued. 5-mile approach on foot to avoid detection. Thompson establishes overwatch from this ridge. Ramirez, Walsh, and I will breach the compound perimeter. Brennan secures our extraction route. Reynolds accompanies me to the medical facility. Eleanor noted she would be directly under Walker's supervision, still not trusted to operate independently. Questions, Walker asked. What's our exfil plan if we locate wounded personnel unable to move under their own power? Eleanor asked. 2 options, Walker replied. Primary is helicopter extraction from this clearing 2 clicks south of the compound. Secondary is ground transport using captured vehicles to rendezvous point here. He indicated a location on the map. Final note, he added, his voice turning grave. Admiral Harrington has authorized Protocol Zulu for this mission. The room went silent. Protocol Zulu, the directive authorizing operators to take final measures to prevent classified information or personnel from falling into enemy hands. It was rarely explicitly authorized. Dismissed. Gear check at 2,000 hours, Walker concluded. Reynolds a word. As the others filed out, Eleanor remained standing before Walker. When they were alone, his professional mask slipped slightly. I'll be direct, Reynolds. I don't care about your commendations or who your father was. My priority is finding my men and completing this mission. If you become a liability, I won't hesitate to send you back. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I understand, sir. Walker held her eyes a moment longer. David Mitchell saved my life twice. Whatever it takes, I'm bringing him home one way or another. The personal cost of leadership was written in the lines of his face. Eleanor recognized the depth of loyalty in his voice, the same loyalty that bound all soldiers together, the unspoken promise that no one would be left behind. We'll find him, sir, she said simply. That evening, Eleanor prepared her medical kit with methodical precision. Each bandage, each medication, each instrument had its place organized for quick access when seconds meant the difference between life and death. Walsh approached, setting down a heavy case. Thought you might want to familiarize yourself with these, he said, opening it to reveal explosive device components and diffusing tools. If we encounter IEDs, having another person who knows the basics could save lives. Eleanor recognized the gesture for what it was, an olive branch, an acceptance not yet offered by all team members. These wires here, Walsh explained, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he demonstrated. Most people would cut the red one first, but that's actually a decoy. The real trigger is this blue one underneath. For the next hour, he walked her through different configurations, patiently answering her questions. By the time they finished, Eleanor had gained not just knowledge, but a measure of Walsh's respect. You catch on fast, he said, packing away the equipment. Eleanor shrugged. After you've sewn someone back together while mortars are dropping, not much seems intimidating. Walsh actually smiled, a rare sight she suspected. Later at the gear check, Eleanor found herself working alongside Thompson as he prepared his sniper rifle. She noticed the custom modifications, the specialized scope, the adjusted stock. Schmidt and Bender PMT-toi, she commented, nodding toward the scope. Thompson glanced up, surprised, briefly crossing his face. You know optics. My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she explained. Said everyone should know how to defend themselves. Thompson studied her with new interest. Your file mentions sniper qualification. I'm no expert like you, but I can hit what I aim at, she said simply. Thompson almost smiled. Almost. It's not just equipment, he said, returning to his work. It's reading the environment. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, they all affect trajectory. Like medicine, Diener observed, every patient is different. You have to read the signs, adapt to conditions. Thompson considered this, then nodded slowly. Never thought of it that way. The ice was breaking slowly but surely. Not with everyone. Brennan still kept his distance, disapproval evident, but progress was being made. At midnight, the team gathered for final briefing. Walker had updated intelligence. Thermal imaging shows approximately 25 personnel on site, he said. Most concentrated here. He indicated the main building, but significant activity in the medical facility too. Could be good news for our missing team. Or very bad news, Brennan muttered. Walker outlined each team member's role, emphasizing stealth, until they confirmed the status of the captured operators. As the briefing concluded, Admiral Harrington entered. The team immediately stood at attention. As you were, Harrington said, his voice gravelly but commanding. I wanted to see you off personally. He moved to the tactical display, studying it with the shrewd assessment of decades of combat experience. This mission goes beyond personnel recovery, he said gravely. What Petrov may be developing could represent an existential threat. If he's acquired the biological agents, our intelligence suggests the danger to national security cannot be overstated. The weight of responsibility settled heavier on Eleanor's shoulders. This wasn't just about finding missing soldiers, it was about preventing a potential catastrophe. One last thing, Harrington added, his voice solemn. Mitchell was my godson. Bring him home if you can, but complete the mission at all costs. The team departed the briefing room in silence, each person carrying the burden of what lay ahead. At 0200, they assembled on the tarmac where a stealth Black Hawk waited, rotors already turning. The night air was cool, stars brilliantly clear in the Arizona sky. Each operator performed final equipment checks in silence. Thoughts turned inward. Eleanor secured her helmet and checked her night vision mount. Her tactical vest carried medical supplies in addition to standard combat gear, sidearm, extra magazines, radio water. The familiar weight was almost comforting. Walker approached his face partially hidden by shadows. "Ready, Reynolds?" "Yes, sir." He studied her a moment. "Your father would be proud. Let's bring our boys home." The team boarded the helicopter in practice motion. As it lifted off, Eleanor gazed at the faces of her teammates. Walker's grim determination, Thompson's calm focus, Walsh's quiet strength, Ramirez's alert intelligence, Brennan's barely contained intensity. Each carried their own motivation for this mission. For some, it was duty. For others, like Walker, it was deeply personal. For Eleanor, it was becoming both. The helicopter banked east, heading into the darkness. Below them, the landscape changed from scattered outposts to the empty wilderness of northern Arizona, perfect hiding place for those with something to hide. 5 minutes to drop point, the pilot's voice announced through their headsets. The team performed final weapons checks. Eleanor caught Thompson watching her. "First time with SEALs?" he asked. She nodded. "Stick close to Walker," he advised. "He's the best combat leader I've ever seen. Despite the rough start, he won't let you down." "Thanks," Eleanor replied, surprised by the unexpected support. The helicopter descended rapidly, hovering just above a small clearing. No landing, no lights, just fast rope deployment. One by one, the team slid down, Eleanor moving with the same practiced efficiency as the others. As the helicopter disappeared into the night, Walker activated his night vision and signaled the team forward. Eleanor fell into position, her medical training momentarily secondary to her role as a combatant. For the next 5 miles, they would move as shadows through the desert. The terrain was challenging, steep ravines, loose rocks, thorny vegetation that snagged on equipment. But the team moved with practiced ease, maintaining formation and pace. Eleanor kept up without difficulty. Her breathing controlled her movements precise. She had trained for this moment. 2 hours later, they reached the ridge overlooking the compound. Thompson set up his sniper position, adjusting his rifle on its bipod and settling behind the scope. "I have eyes on 4 sentries," he reported softly into his radio. "Regular patrols, 10-minute intervals. Standard military pattern." Walker studied the compound through binoculars. "Ramirez electronic surveillance, detecting wireless camera signals and motion sensors along the perimeter," Ramirez confirmed. "I can loop the feeds for 3 minutes per sector, enough if we time it right." Walsh indicated 3 potential breach locations. "Main gate is heavily guarded. East fence has less coverage, but it's close to the barracks. South approach has the most cover." Walker made his decision. "We'll take the south approach. Thompson provides overwatch. Walsh and Brennan secure our exfil route and create a diversion at the north end if needed. Ramirez, Reynolds, and I will infiltrate to locate the prisoners." As the team made final preparations, Walsh's expression grew concerned as he studied the perimeter. "Walker," he called softly, "you need to see this." The lieutenant moved over, taking the offered scope. "The patrol patterns," Walsh explained. "That's a sweep formation. They're expecting company." Walker observed silently, his expression hardening. "They know we're coming." "How?" Ramirez asked. "This mission was classified at the highest level." "Doesn't matter now," Walker replied. "We adjust. Thompson, can you take out the sentries simultaneously with Brennan?" "South and east guards, yes. West would be a problem from this angle." "We'll risk it," Walker decided. "We stick with the south approach but accelerate the timeline. Thompson and Brennan eliminate the sentries on my mark. We breach, move directly to the medical facility." The team acknowledged the changes. As they prepared to move out, Eleanor felt growing unease. The mission parameters kept shifting, the threat level escalating. "Sir," she asked quietly, "what aren't you telling us about this mission?" Walker paused, studying her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. The missing team wasn't just conducting surveillance. They were sent to eliminate Petrov. If he's developing weaponized versions of Cold War-era pathogens, this goes beyond terrorism. It's a potential extinction-level threat. Eleanor absorbed this information, understanding now the extreme classification, the personal involvement of Admiral Harrington, the authorization of Protocol Zulu. "So our real mission? Find our men if possible, confirm Petrov's identity, eliminate him and destroy his research," Walker confirmed grimly. "The airstrike is already authorized once we're clear." Before Eleanor could respond, Thompson's voice came through the radio. "Movement at the south entrance. Vehicle approaching. The team froze watching as a black SUV pulled up to the compound gate. The guards snapped to attention as a figure emerged from the back seat, tall, thin, with the careful movements of an elderly man. "That's him," Walker whispered. "That's Petrov." Through her binoculars, Eleanor observed an elderly man with white hair and rigid posture, dressed in what appeared to be a lab coat even at this early hour. He was escorted inside by armed guards moving toward the medical facility. Change of plans, Walker decided instantly. We take advantage of their distraction. Move now while Petrov is in the facility. That's where our men will be if they're still alive. As the team prepared to descend the ridge, Eleanor noticed something about the compound's layout that had been bothering her since she first saw the satellite images. "Sir," she said urgently, "I think this entire compound is designed as a trap. The obvious approaches, even the less guarded ones, they're all killing zones." Walker paused, reassessing with this perspective. His expression changed as he recognized the pattern. "Good eye, Reynolds," he acknowledged. "Ramirez's alternative approach options." Ramirez studied his tactical pad. "There's a drainage culvert on the west side. Satellite imagery shows it runs under the perimeter fence. Tight fit but manageable." "That's our way in," Walker decided. "Thompson, stay on overwatch. The rest of you follow me." They carefully made their way down the ridge toward the drainage culvert, a concrete pipe barely 3 feet in diameter, partially obscured by brush. One by one they crawled inside, moving silently through the claustrophobic space. Eleanor controlled her breathing, keeping her movements smooth as they progressed inch by inch toward the compound perimeter. After what seemed like eternity, they reached a metal grate. Walsh examined it carefully, then produced specialized cutters from his gear. Working with painstaking precision, he created an opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. "Ramirez first, then Reynolds, then me," Walker whispered. "Walsh and Brendan hold this position as our exfil route." One by one they emerged into the compound, taking cover behind a storage shed. The medical facility stood 50 meters away, its windows illuminated despite the early hour. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but their attention was focused outward, expecting an external threat. "Thompson," Walker whispered into his radio. "Status." "All clear from my position," came the reply. "You're in their blind spot." "Wait." There was a pause. Movement at the medical facility entrance. 2 guards escorting someone inside. "Can't confirm identity." Walker made a quick decision. "We move now. Ramirez, loop the cameras. Reynolds, stay on my 6. With practiced precision, they advanced toward the medical facility using shadows and structures for cover. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her movements remained controlled, her senses hyper-aware. They reached the side entrance. Walker positioned himself beside the door while Ramirez attached a small device to the electronic lock. Seconds later, the light turned green. "Ready," Walker mouthed. Eleanor and Ramirez nodded, weapons at the ready. Walker held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The world exploded around them. Not from their entry, but from the opposite side of the compound, a massive detonation that rocked the ground, followed by the rapid staccato of automatic weapons fire. "We've been compromised." Thompson's urgent voice came through their comms. "Multiple hostiles approaching from the North Ridge. They're using our diversion plan against us." Alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Walker made a split-second decision. Breach now. They burst through the door into the medical facility, weapons raised, only to find themselves facing a scene straight from a nightmare. The sterile white hallway was lined with armed guards, all with weapons trained directly at them. At the end of the hall stood Petrov, a thin smile on his aged face. "Lieutenant Walker," he called, his Russian accent still thick despite decades in hiding. "We've been expecting you. Your friends have been quite informative." From a room behind Petrov came a sound that chilled Eleanor's blood, the weak, pained moan of a man who had endured unimaginable suffering. "Drop your weapons," Petrov commanded, "or watch your comrades die one by one." Walker's expression remained stone-like, but Eleanor could see the rapid calculations behind his eyes, assessing odds, alternatives, escape routes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the element of surprise was lost. Outside, the firefight intensified. Thompson's voice came through, broken and urgent. "Walker, it's an ambush. They're everywhere." In that critical moment, Eleanor made an observation that changed everything. The guards were all wearing subtle but distinctive breathing apparatuses, thin masks covering their noses and mouths. "Biological containment," she whispered to Walker. "They're protected against something airborne." Understanding flashed in Walker's eyes. Whatever was happening in this facility, whatever had been done to their captured comrades, it involved airborne pathogens. As Walker raised his hands in apparent surrender, his finger brushed against his tactical vest, activating the emergency signal for Protocol Zulu. The ground beneath them rumbled with another explosion closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. Petrov's smile never wavered. Your government's persistence is admirable, Lieutenant, but I'm afraid you're too late. The tests are complete and the specimens are ready for deployment. He gestured to a lab visible through a glass partition where rows of metallic canisters stood on shelves. Your captured friends provided excellent data on American immunological responses. Walker's voice was ice cold. You won't make it out of here alive, Petrov. On the contrary, the Russian replied, I believe it is you who. The wall behind them exploded inward with devastating force. The concussive blast threw Eleanor to the ground, her ears ringing, vision blurred. Through the smoke and debris, she made out Walsh and Brennan, charging through the breach, weapons firing with precision at the disoriented guards. In the chaos, Eleanor crawled toward Walker, who had been knocked down by the blast. Blood streamed from a cut on his forehead, but he was already struggling to his feet. The prisoners, he shouted over the gunfire. Find them! Eleanor moved toward the rooms beyond Petrov, who had disappeared in the confusion. The hallway was filled with smoke and fallen guards. Her medical instincts warred with her tactical training. Treat the wounded or complete the mission. The decision was made when she kicked open a door and found what they had come for. 3 men lay strapped to hospital beds, their bodies emaciated, covered in lesions and monitoring equipment. They were barely recognizable as the elite operators they had once been. One turned his head slightly at her entrance, eyes widening in recognition of her uniform. American, he whispered, voice barely audible. Yes, Eleanor replied, already checking his vital signs. U.S. Army, we're getting you out. The man's hand weakly gripped her wrist. No, escape. We're infected. Protocol Zulu. Eleanor's blood ran cold as she understood the full horror. These men hadn't just been tortured, they had been used as test subjects for biological weapons. Walker, she called urgently into her radio, found 3 survivors, Medical Bay East Side. They're infected with unknown pathogens. Need immediate extraction and containment protocols. Static answered her. Communications were down. Eleanor began freeing the man from his restraints. What did they use on you? What kind of pathogen? Modified hemorrhagic fever, he managed. Airborne genetic targeting. They called it Red Death. Outside, the sounds of battle intensified. Eleanor worked quickly, checking the other 2 men. One was unconscious but stable. The third had no pulse, dead for hours. The door burst open. Eleanor spun, raising her sidearm, then lowered it as Walker appeared, his uniform torn and bloodied. Status, he demanded. 2 alive, 1 KIA, she reported. They've been exposed to an engineered pathogen. Petrov was using them as test subjects. Walker's expression darkened as he took in the scene. Can they be moved? Eleanor hesitated. Moving them risks spreading the contagion. Without proper containment. Not an option, Walker cut in. This entire facility is wired to blow. Thompson spotted a countdown. We have 7 minutes to clear the area. The wounded SEAL struggled to sit up. Walker, leave us. Complete the mission. Can't risk spreading it. Walker knelt beside the man, recognition dawning on his face. Davis, Jesus. His voice broke slightly. Where's Mitchell? Dead, 2 days ago. Davis coughed, blood speckling his lips. The others, separate facility. Don't know where. Walker's radio crackled to life. Ramirez's voice came through. Lieutenant, we've secured the lab, found research data and samples. Petrov is attempting escape by helicopter on the north pad. Walker looked torn, glancing between the wounded men and the door. Go, Eleanor said firmly. Stop Petrov. I'll handle evacuation. After a moment's hesitation, Walker nodded. 5 minutes. Extraction point, or we leave without you. Understood. As Walker disappeared down the hallway, Eleanor turned back to the wounded operators. I'm getting you out of here. Davis shook his head weakly. No, too dangerous. We're contaminated. Eleanor was already pulling emergency isolation equipment from her medical pack, specialized body bags designed for biological containment of wounded personnel. I'm not leaving anyone behind, she stated firmly. That's not how we operate. As she worked to secure Davis in the specialized containment, the building shook with another explosion. Time was running out. The unconscious SEAL would be more challenging. As Eleanor struggled to move his dead weight into the second containment bag, she heard helicopter rotors starting up Petrov attempting his escape. Through the window, she could see the firefight continuing across the compound. Walsh and Brennan were engaged with hostile forces near the perimeter, while Ramirez provided covering fire from behind a concrete barrier. Thompson's precision shots were taking down targets from his overwatch position. With superhuman effort, Eleanor dragged both containment bags toward the door. The unconscious SEAL weighed over 200 pounds, and even with the drag handles moving him was exhausting. Sweat poured down her face as she pulled them into the hallway. The smoke was thicker now, flames visible at the far end of the corridor. The facility's self-destruct sequence had begun. Eleanor keyed her radio. Need extraction assistance. Medical Bay hallway east entrance. Before she could drag them further, the wall beside her exploded inward. The force threw her across the hallway, pain shooting through her shoulder as she slammed into the opposite wall. Through blurred vision, she saw armed men entering through the breach, more of Petrov's forces. Eleanor drew her sidearm, firing rapidly while scrambling back toward the containment bags. 2 hostiles went down, but more were coming. Just as she thought they were overwhelmed, Walsh appeared from the smoke behind the intruders, his massive form charging forward like an avenging spirit. His rifle barked in controlled bursts, dropping the remaining enemies with precision. "Reynolds," he shouted, rushing to her side. "You hit!" "I'm good," she gasped, though her shoulder screamed in protest. "Help me with them." Walsh shouldered his weapon and grabbed the drag handles of the heavier containment bag. "Biological containment," he asked, recognizing the specialized equipment. "Yes, full protocols in effect. Don't breach the seals." They moved as quickly as possible through the burning facility. The building was coming apart around them, ceiling panels crashing down electrical systems, shorting out the heat, becoming unbearable. They emerged into the chaotic courtyard. The morning sun revealed the full extent of the battle bodies scattered across the ground, vehicles burning, northern buildings already collapsed. Above them, 2 helicopters engaged in aerial combat. Petrov's escape vehicle pursued by what appeared to be a military attack helicopter that had arrived as reinforcement. "Extraction point!" Walsh shouted over the noise, pointing toward the western perimeter, where Ramirez was waving frantically beside a breach in the fence. They half ran, half staggered across open ground, painfully exposed. Bullets kicked up dust at their feet as remaining hostiles fired from defensive positions. Thompson provided covering fire from his elevated position, his precision shots eliminating threats one by one. Brennan appeared from behind a burning vehicle, providing additional covering fire as they approached the extraction point. A specialized Black Hawk was touching down in a swirl of dust just beyond the perimeter fence. "Move, move, move!" Walker shouted from the helicopter door, firing past them at pursuing hostiles. With a final surge of effort, they dragged the containment bags through the fence breach and toward the waiting helicopter. Medical personnel in hazmat gear rushed forward to assist, quickly securing the contaminated seals in the aircraft's specialized containment area. "Petrov," Eleanor gasped as Walsh helped her aboard. Walker's expression was grim. "Got away. For now." The helicopter lifted off Thompson, sprinting toward them from his sniper position, Ramirez providing covering fire for his approach. The Black Hawk hovered just long enough for both men to leap aboard before banking sharply away from the compound. Through the window, Eleanor watched multiple explosions ripple through the facility, secondary detonations creating a firestorm that consumed everything within the perimeter fence. Protocol Zulu in action, no evidence left, all biological contaminants destroyed. Walker moved to sit beside her, his own injuries evident in his stiff movements. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Walker extended his hand. "You did good back there, Reynolds. Really good." Eleanor accepted the handshake, the simple gesture conveying more respect than words could express. "Thank you, sir. Those men would be dead without you," he continued. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star." Eleanor shook her head. "Just doing my job, sir." Walsh joined them, his massive frame folding into the seat opposite. "Hell of a job, Doc." He gestured to the containment area where medical personnel were working on the rescued SEALs. "They going to make it?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Too early to tell. Depends on what Petrov exposed them to and how long they've been infected. But if anyone can save them, it's the containment team at Fort Detrick." As the helicopter sped toward the rising sun, Eleanor felt the weight of what they had discovered. Petrov was alive and had developed a biological weapon, potentially with genetic targeting capabilities. He had escaped with at least some of his research. This mission had stopped one facility, but the broader threat remained. Walker seemed to read her thoughts. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Petrov will resurface, and when he does, we'll be ready." Eleanor nodded, understanding that today's mission was just one battle in a longer war. They had struck a significant blow, destroyed a bioweapons facility, rescued survivors, recovered intelligence. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead. As the adrenaline faded, fatigue swept over her. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the vibration of the helicopter lull her toward much-needed rest. There would be debriefings, medical examinations, and new missions to come. But for now, they had done what they set out to do. They had brought their people home. The helicopter touched down at a classified military installation, hidden among the scrubby hills of southern Arizona. Medical teams in full biohazard suits rushed forward, carefully extracting the containment bags holding the rescued SEALs. Eleanor watched through the helicopter's window as they were wheeled toward a reinforced structure marked with biohazard symbols, the kind of facility few Americans knew existed on their own soil. 3 days later, Eleanor sat in a sterile hospital room, her left arm immobilized in a sling. The doctors had confirmed a dislocated shoulder, 3 cracked ribs, and multiple shrapnel wounds, injuries that would have hospitalized most people for weeks. But Eleanor had refused anything more than basic treatment. There was work to be done. Admiral Harrington entered, closing the door behind him. His face was drawn with fatigue, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been before the mission. "Davis will live," he said without preamble. "The other SEAL, Torres, is still critical but stable. Your quick action with the containment protocols saved not just their lives, but potentially thousands more." Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her. "And the pathogen? Initial analysis confirms it's a modified hemorrhagic fever, genetically engineered to target specific DNA markers." Harrington's voice was grave. "Petrov wasn't just building a weapon, Reynolds. He was designing a virus that could target specific ethnic groups while leaving others unaffected." The implications sent a chill through Eleanor, despite the room's warmth. This wasn't terrorism, it was preparation for genocide on an industrial scale. "The missing canisters," she asked, "still unaccounted for. At least 6 were taken during Petrov's escape." Harrington moved to the window, staring out at the desert landscape. "Intelligence is working every angle, but Petrov has gone completely dark." Eleanor shifted painfully in her chair. "What about Walker's team? Already preparing for the next phase. Walker specifically requested you remain attached to the unit." Harrington turned, studying her with his penetrating gaze. He said, "You proved yourself beyond any reasonable expectation." Coming from someone like Walker, this was high praise indeed. "Davis provided critical intelligence during his lucid periods." Harrington continued, "Petrov has a secondary facility. We believe it's somewhere near the Mexican border, but Davis was blindfolded during transport between locations." Eleanor processed this information. "When do we move?" Harrington almost smiled. "You're supposed to be on medical leave for at least 2 weeks. "With respect, sir, we don't have 2 weeks. Those canisters could be anywhere by now." The Admiral nodded, unsurprised by her response. "Briefing at 0800 tomorrow. Medical will clear you for limited duty." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father would be proud, Reynolds. He had the same stubborn streak, never stayed in a hospital bed when there was a mission to complete." After he left, Eleanor forced herself to her feet, ignoring the protest from her injured body. She moved slowly to the bathroom mirror, examining her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. A new scar ran along her jaw where shrapnel had cut deep. Her auburn hair, usually pulled back in a regulation bun, hung loose around her shoulders. She looked different somehow, harder perhaps. The mission had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Eleanor closed her eyes, seeing again the ravaged faces of the SEALs. They had rescued men who had endured unimaginable horrors in service to their country. Their sacrifice demanded a response. Petrov had to be stopped, his weapons destroyed, his network dismantled, whatever it took. The briefing room was subdued when Eleanor entered the next morning. Walker's team sat around the table, their faces showing a mix of fatigue and determination. Thompson nodded respectfully as she took a seat, while Walsh offered a small smile. Even Brennan, who had initially been so skeptical, gave her a look that bordered on approval. Walker stood at the tactical display, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much since their return. Yet his voice remained strong, his focus unwavering, as he outlined what they knew. Satellite imagery has identified 3 potential locations for Petrov's secondary facility, he explained, indicating points on the map. All within 20 miles of the border, all showing unusual activity patterns over the past month. Ramirez took over, pulling up thermal imagery. This site shows the most promise. Regular supply deliveries, consistent power usage well above normal for the structure size, and multiple heat signatures indicative of laboratory equipment. Walker turned to Eleanor. Davis is conscious but still critical. He mentioned something about Petrov's delivery system, specialized drones capable of dispersing the pathogen over populated areas. Does that match anything you observed in the medical facility? Eleanor thought back to the canisters she had glimpsed through the lab window. The containers I saw were roughly the size of fire extinguishers, ideal for drone deployment. They had specialized nozzles that could aerosolize the contents. Walker nodded grimly. That fits with Davis's description. Petrov told his captives that the first targets would be military installations, followed by major population centers. The room fell silent as each person contemplated the implications. A targeted biological attack against American military bases would devastate the country's defensive capabilities, leaving it vulnerable to conventional attacks that might follow. Intel suggests Petrov isn't working alone, Walker continued. He has financial backing from someone with significant resources, someone willing to pay for custom bioweapons. Do we know who? Thompson asked. Not yet, but we've intercepted communications suggesting a demonstration of the weapon is scheduled within the next 72 hours. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. A demonstration where... That's what we need to find out, Walker replied. Our mission is twofold: locate the secondary facility and identify the target of the demonstration before it occurs. The team spent the next hour developing their approach. The challenges were significant: limited intelligence, an enemy who knew they were coming, and the ticking clock of the planned demonstration. We'll split into 2 teams, Walker decided. Thompson, Brennan, and I will investigate the primary site. Ramirez, Walsh, and Reynolds will cover the secondary location. Full communication protocols, regular check-ins. If either team confirms Petrov's presence, we converge and execute. As the meeting concluded, Walker approached Eleanor. Medical says you shouldn't be in the field, he said quietly, but I need you on this. The biological component puts you in a unique position to recognize what we're dealing with. I'm ready, sir. Walker studied her face. This is going to be worse than last time, Reynolds. Petrov knows we're coming. He'll be prepared. So will we, she replied simply. That night, Eleanor checked her gear, paying special attention to the enhanced medical kit she had requested. It now included specialized countermeasures for biological agents, emergency vaccines, broad-spectrum antivirals, and containment equipment. If they encountered Petrov's weapons again, she wanted every possible advantage. A knock at her door interrupted her preparations. Walsh stood outside his massive frame, nearly filling the doorway. Thought you might want this, he said, handing her a small metal case. Inside was a customized sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 with modified grips designed for smaller hands. Noticed your standard issue was a bit unwieldy for your hand size during the last stop. This should give you better control. Eleanor was touched by the gesture. Thank you, I appreciate it. Walsh nodded awkwardly. Thompson zeroed the sights himself, said to tell you it's the least he could do after you saved his ass last time. After Walsh left, Eleanor tested the new weapon's weight and balance. It fit her hand perfectly. The team was accepting her not just as a medic now, but as a combat operator in her own right. The thought brought a complicated mix of pride and solemnity. Such acceptance came at a high cost, proven in blood and fire. At 0400, the teams departed in separate Blackhawks. The pre-dawn sky was still dark stars, sharp pinpricks against the vast emptiness. Eleanor sat beside Ramirez, studying satellite imagery of their target, an abandoned mining facility tucked into a remote canyon. Approach will be challenging, Ramirez explained over the helicopter's thrum. Canyon walls limit insertion options. We'll need to rappel down from the ridge and proceed on foot. Walsh checked his demolition gear. Place like that would have extensive tunnel systems. Good for hiding, bad for us. Lots of choke points, potential ambush locations. Eleanor studied the thermal imaging again. Something about the heat signatures troubled her. These readings are inconsistent with a standard lab setup. More like, she paused, realization dawning. More like incubation chambers. Ramirez and Walsh exchanged concerned glances. You think he's growing the pathogen there? Ramirez asked. It's possible. Large-scale production would require specialized equipment, fermenters, centrifuges, lyophilizers. But with enough resources, we'll find out soon enough, Walsh said grimly. The helicopter set them down 5 miles from the target on the far side of a ridge that would shield their approach from both visual and thermal detection. As they disembarked, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They were the only ones who could stop what was coming. The terrain was treacherous loose scree that threatened to send them sliding thorny vegetation that tore at exposed skin, sheer drops that required careful navigation. Despite her injuries, Eleanor kept pace, refusing to become the weak link. Her shoulder throbbed with each movement, but she channeled the pain into focus. They reached the canyon rim as first light began to bleed across the horizon. Below them, the abandoned mining facility sprawled across the canyon floor, a collection of weathered buildings, rusted equipment, and the dark mouth of the main shaft entrance. No guards were visible, but Eleanor knew appearances could be deceiving. Too quiet, Walsh murmured, echoing her thoughts. Ramirez scanned the area with high-powered binoculars. No visible security, no vehicles, no movement. Could be underground, Eleanor suggested. If he's producing biologicals, he'd want controlled conditions, temperature, humidity, air filtration. The mine shafts would be ideal. Walsh nodded. Let's move. Standard infiltration pattern. Ramirez on point, Reynolds center, I'll take rear guard. They secured their rappelling lines and descended the canyon wall with practiced efficiency. Eleanor's injured shoulder screamed in protest, but she focused on her breathing, controlling the pain through sheer force of will. The descent seemed to take hours, though it was likely only minutes before their boots touched the canyon floor. The facility looked even more abandoned up close. Dust covered everything, no footprints marked the ground. The main building's door hung from broken hinges, creaking softly in the morning breeze. Something's wrong, Eleanor whispered. This place hasn't been accessed for months. Ramirez checked his handheld thermal scanner, but the heat signatures from satellite were clear. Unless they're underground, Walsh finished, the mine shaft. They moved cautiously toward the dark opening that led into the mountainside. The entrance was partially collapsed, requiring them to squeeze through a narrow gap. Eleanor activated her tactical light, illuminating a tunnel that stretched into darkness. Old rail tracks ran along the floor, disappearing around a distant bend. Airflow, she noted, feeling the faint movement against her cheek. Coming from inside, there's another entrance, or they've installed ventilation. They proceeded slowly, alert for tripwires or motion sensors. The tunnel sloped gently downward, taking them deeper into the earth. After approximately 200 meters, it opened into a larger chamber, clearly part of the original mine, but showing signs of recent modification. New support beams reinforced the ceiling. Fresh electrical conduits ran along the walls. LED lights cast harsh shadows across the rough-hewn space. But it was empty. No lab equipment, no personnel, no sign of Petrov's operation. This doesn't make sense, Ramirez muttered, checking his scanner again. The thermal readings were definitive. Walsh moved to examine a heavy metal door set into the far wall. Recent installation, high security grade. He studied the electronic lock. I can bypass this, but it'll take time. Do it, Eleanor said, her instincts screaming that whatever lay beyond that door was crucial to their mission. While Walsh worked on the lock, Eleanor and Ramirez searched the chamber, looking for any clues to Petrov's operation. Eleanor noticed something odd about the ventilation system. The filters were industrial grade, the kind used in biosafety facilities. They're filtering the air going out, not coming in, she observed. Containment, not protection. Ramirez looked troubled. That would only be necessary if they were working with live pathogens, Eleanor finished grimly. Or testing them. A soft beep announced Walsh's success with the lock. The heavy door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a sterile corridor beyond white walls, sealed floors, recessed lighting. It looked completely out of place in the rough mine setting, like stepping from one world into another. Full biological containment protocols, Eleanor warned, pulling specialized masks from her pack. These won't stop everything, but they're better than nothing. The corridor led to another security door, which Walsh bypassed more quickly this time. Beyond it lay what they had been seeking, a fully equipped modern laboratory. Stainless steel workbenches gleamed under bright lights. Sophisticated equipment lined the walls. Computer monitors displayed complex data streams. Refrigeration units hummed quietly, but like the chamber before it was deserted. No personnel, no signs of recent activity. Check the computers, Eleanor instructed Ramirez while she moved to examine the refrigeration units. What she found inside chilled her more than the cold air that escaped when she opened the door. Rows of vials, clearly labeled in Cyrillic script, each containing a dark viscous fluid. Samples, she breathed. Dozens of them. Ramirez worked quickly at the main computer terminal. Encrypted but not completely, I can access some of the recent files. His expression grew increasingly grim as he scrolled through the data. These are test results, human subjects, detailed progression of symptoms, time to death, effectiveness of various delivery methods. Eleanor felt sick as she realized the implications. The missing SEALs weren't the first test subjects. Not by a long shot, Ramirez confirmed, still reading. These trials date back months, multiple variants of the pathogen tested on God. He stopped, looking up with horror in his eyes. Tested on migrants captured crossing the border. The brutality of it was staggering. Using desperate people seeking a better life as unwitting test subjects for weapons of mass destruction. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. Download everything, she ordered, her voice tight with controlled rage. Every file, every test result. Then we destroy this place. Ramirez nodded, plugging in a specialized drive to copy the data. Meanwhile, Walsh had been examining the lab's layout. There's another section beyond that door, he reported, and I'm picking up faint electromagnetic signatures. Could be active equipment. With Ramirez still downloading, Eleanor and Walsh approached the final door. This one was different, reinforced steel with a biometric security panel. Walsh examined it carefully. Can't bypass this one without the right fingerprint or retinal scan. Eleanor studied the lock. We don't have time for finesse. She turned to Walsh. Can you breach it? A thin smile crossed his face as he removed a small shaped charge from his pack. Thought you'd never ask. They took cover behind a reinforced workbench as Walsh detonated the charge. The controlled explosion shattered the lock mechanism, the door swinging open on bent hinges. Smoke filled the air, setting off automatic alarms throughout the facility. So much for the stealthy approach, Ramirez muttered, grabbing the data drive and joining them. Beyond the destroyed door lay the true heart of Petrov's operation, a large chamber filled with specialized production equipment. Industrial fermenters bubbled with dark fluid. Centrifuges whirred continuously. Most ominously, an assembly line of sorts ran along one wall, where the familiar metal canisters Eleanor had seen at the previous facility were being filled automatically. It's automated, she realized. The whole production process. That's why there's no one here. They don't need to be. Walsh moved quickly to the control systems. The whole place is on a timer. These readouts show production has been running for weeks. He pointed to a digital display. And according to this, final batch completion is set for... He trailed off, his expression darkening. When, Ashinor demanded, 6 hours from now. The implications were clear. The demonstration Petrov had planned was imminent. They had found his production facility, but not the delivery mechanism or the target. We need to shut this down and warn Walker's team, Ramirez said, already reaching for his radio. Eleanor moved to a large digital map displayed on the wall. It showed the southwestern United States and northern Mexico, with several locations marked with red indicators. One pulsed steadily, a location just north of the border in southern Arizona. I think I found the target, she said grimly. Coordinates match Fort Huachuca, home to the Army Intelligence Center and major drone operations facility. Walsh joined her at the map. Makes sense. Military target relatively isolated. Perfect for a demonstration that would terrify government officials without immediately triggering full-scale retaliation. Ramirez cursed softly as he tried the radio again. Can't raise Walker's team. Too much rock between us and the surface, and something's jamming our signal. We need to warn them and call in a strike on this facility, Eleanor said, thinking rapidly. Walsh, can you rig this place to blow? Already planning the demolition package, he replied, unpacking explosives from his gear. but someone needs to get topside and make contact. Eleanor made the decision instantly. Ramirez helped Walsh place the charges. I'll head back to the surface and alert command. Meet at the extraction point in 30 minutes. You shouldn't go alone, Ramirez objected. Your injuries are less important than getting this done right. Eleanor cut him off. Walsh needs your technical expertise to ensure complete destruction. I can move fast enough on my own. Before they could argue further, she took the data drive, checked her weapon, and headed for the tunnel. Every minute counted now. Thousands of lives hung in the balance. The ascent through the mine shaft seemed longer than the descent had been. Eleanor pushed herself, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the throbbing pain from her injuries. When she finally emerged into daylight, she immediately attempted to establish communications. Command, this is Reynolds. Priority Alpha. Confirmation code Sierra Echo Victor 89. Biological threat imminent at Fort Huachuca. Request immediate evacuation protocol and airstrike on my position. Static answered her. She tried again, moving to higher ground for better signal. Still nothing. Either the jamming extended beyond the mine or something else was interfering with communications. A sound made her freeze, the distinctive whine of a drone approaching. Eleanor took cover behind a rusted piece of mining equipment, scanning the sky. There it was, a sleek black quadcopter, hovering about 50 meters away, its camera clearly focused on her position. They had been discovered. Eleanor raised her weapon, taking careful aim at the drone. The first shot missed. The second clipped one of its rotors, sending it spinning erratically before it stabilized. The third struck the body of the drone, which suddenly exploded in a bright flash. Not a reconnaissance drone, a weapon. She barely had time to duck before more drones appeared, at least 6 of them, each armed with what appeared to be small missiles. These weren't the delivery systems for the bioweapon. They were security measures designed to eliminate intruders. The first missile struck nearby, showering Eleanor with debris. She rolled to new cover, firing at the closest drone. Her shot connected, sending the machine crashing to the ground. But the others adjusted their position, spreading out to flank her. Eleanor knew she couldn't win this fight alone. She needed to reach the extraction point where the helicopter could provide support. But first she needed to warn Ramirez and Walsh about the new threat. She activated her radio. Walsh, Ramirez surface is hot. Multiple armed drones. Set your charges and get out now. Through the static, Walsh's voice came through faintly. Roger that. Charges set. 10-minute timer. We're on our way up. Another missile struck nearby, closer this time. Eleanor returned fire, taking down another drone, but the remaining 4 continued their deadly dance above her. She needed to move to draw them away from the mine entrance, where her teammates would soon emerge. Taking a deep breath, she broke cover and sprinted toward the canyon rim. The drones followed just as she had hoped. Another missile exploded behind her, the concussion wave sending her sprawling. She rolled back to her feet, ignoring the fresh pain shooting through her ribs. The extraction point was still half a mile away, too far to reach with the drones in pursuit. She needed a new plan. Her gaze fell on the old mining office, a sturdy stone structure that might provide better cover than the scattered equipment. She changed direction, zigzagging to make herself a harder target. 2 more missiles struck nearby, but she kept moving, adrenaline pushing her beyond normal human endurance. She reached the building and crashed through the doorway just as another missile detonated where she had been seconds before. Inside, dust covered ancient desks and filing cabinets. Eleanor moved quickly to a window, taking careful aim at the nearest drone. Her shot struck true, and another enemy fell from the sky. 3 left. Her radio crackled. Reynolds' position. It was Ramirez, his voice tight with urgency. Mining office. 3 drones still active. Be advised, they're armed with explosives. Hold tight. We're coming to you. Eleanor wanted to tell them to head straight for extraction, but she knew they wouldn't listen. That's what a team did. They didn't leave anyone behind. She spotted movement near the mine entrance, Walsh and Ramirez emerging cautiously, weapons raised. The drones immediately shifted focus, 2 breaking off to engage the new threats, while 1 remained hovering near the office. Eleanor saw her opportunity. She aimed carefully and fired twice at the lone drone. The second shot connected, sending it spiraling into the canyon wall. But her position was now exposed, and the sound of approaching vehicles reached her ears, reinforcements arriving. She had to reach her teammates and get to extraction before they were completely surrounded. Taking a deep breath, she burst from the building, running in a crouch toward Walsh and Ramirez, who provided covering fire against the remaining drones. A black SUV appeared at the far end of the facility, armed men pouring out. Eleanor recognized the tactical gear, the same worn by Petrov's forces at the previous compound. They opened fire immediately, bullets kicking up dust around her as she ran. She was 20 meters from her teammates when pain exploded through her left leg. A bullet had found its mark, passing through her thigh. She stumbled, but kept moving, blood soaking her pants. 10 meters. 5. Walsh reached her first, his powerful arms literally lifting her off her feet as he carried her behind cover. Ramirez maintained suppressive fire, forcing the approaching hostiles to take cover. "Extraction 5 minutes out," Ramirez reported. "We need to hold this position." Walsh examined Eleanor's leg quickly. "Clean through and through. You're lucky." She almost laughed. "Tell that to my leg." He applied a quick pressure bandage, while Ramirez continued engaging the enemy. "We've got bigger problems," Walsh said grimly. "Those charges are going to blow in about 3 minutes. We need to put some distance between us and that mine shaft." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. More vehicles were arriving. The remaining drones continued their deadly harassment, and the clock was ticking on the demolition charges that would destroy Petrov's bioweapon facility, along with anyone too close to the blast. "The ridge," Eleanor said, pointing to a rocky outcropping about 100 meters away. "If we can reach it before the explosion, it might shield us from the worst of the blast." Walsh nodded. "Ramirez, cover us. I'll carry Reynolds." "I can walk," Eleanor insisted, forcing herself to her feet despite the searing pain. "Not fast enough," Walsh replied bluntly, already moving to lift her in a fireman's carry. The next minute was a blur of motion and noise. Walsh ran for the ridge, carrying Eleanor as if she weighed nothing. Ramirez followed, firing methodically to keep the pursuers at bay. The remaining drones circled overhead, unable to get a clean shot as the team zigzagged between cover. They reached the base of the ridge with less than a minute to spare. Walsh set Eleanor down gently behind a large boulder, then took up a defensive position beside Ramirez. 30 seconds, Walsh called, checking his watch. Eleanor could hear the helicopter now, the distinctive thump of rotor blades growing louder. It would arrive just after the explosion, perfect timing if they survived the blast. 10 seconds, heads down. The 3 operators huddled behind the boulder arms, covering their heads. Eleanor counted silently in her head. 3, 2, 1. The world seemed to pause for a heartbeat, then erupted in chaos. The explosion was massive, far larger than expected. The ground shook violently beneath them. The air pressure changed so suddenly that Eleanor's ears popped painfully. Heat washed over them in a scorching wave. When they dared to look, the mining facility was gone, replaced by a smoking crater and collapsing tunnel system. The force of the blast had thrown vehicles and men like toys. The remaining drones had been knocked from the sky. "Secondary explosions," Walsh explained, his voice hoarse from the dust. "The pathogen production chemicals must have been highly volatile." The helicopter appeared over the ridge, hovering as it searched for a landing zone. Ramirez popped a red smoke grenade to mark their position. "Petrov's going to know his facility is destroyed," Eleanor said as Walsh helped her to her feet. "He'll accelerate his timeline for the demonstration." "Then we need to find him before he can deploy those weapons," Ramirez replied grimly. "The data we recovered should help narrow down his location." As the helicopter settled into a landing nearby, Eleanor took one last look at the destruction they had wrought. One facility destroyed, but Petrov was still out there with enough of the pathogen to cause unimaginable devastation. The real battle was just beginning. "Let's go," she said simply. "We've got work to do." The secure command center at Fort Detrick hummed with activity as screens displayed satellite imagery, data streams, and communication logs. Rear Admiral Harrington stood at the central table, his weathered face grim as he studied the tactical display. Thompson and Brennan from Walker's team were there too, their expressions revealing the urgency of the situation. Eleanor sat nearby, her wounded leg freshly bandaged, an IV drip replenishing fluids she'd lost. Medical staff had insisted on at least minimal treatment before allowing her to join the briefing. Walsh and Ramirez stood behind her, their faces streaked with dust and soot from the mine explosion. "Lieutenant Walker's team located Petrov's control center," Harrington explained, pointing to a location on the digital map, a ranch house 30 miles north of the Mexican border. "They confirmed Petrov's presence but were compromised before they could strike. Walker was captured. We lost contact approximately 90 minutes ago." The news hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Walker captured. Now they had another man to rescue and precious little time to do it. The data recovered from the production facility confirms our worst fears, Harrington continued. Petrov has developed multiple variants of the pathogen, each targeting different genetic markers. The demonstration he's planning isn't just a show of force, it's an advertisement to potential buyers. Ramirez, who had been analyzing the recovered data, stepped forward. According to the production logs, Petrov has enough of the weapon to hit 3 major targets simultaneously. Fort Huachuca appears to be the primary objective, but there are 2 others marked on his deployment schedule. He enhanced the map display, highlighting 3 locations: Fort Huachuca Kirtland Air Force Base and something called Control Point Alpha, which doesn't match any known military installation. It's not military, Eleanor said, suddenly recognition dawning. It's the Southwest Border Control Center, the main coordination hub for all Border Patrol operations in the region. Harrington nodded grimly. Makes strategic sense. Disable military response capabilities and border security simultaneously. Thompson, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Timeline. The demonstration is scheduled for 0600 tomorrow, Ramirez replied. Approximately 9 hours from now. Do we have images of the delivery system, Eleanor asked. Brennan tapped commands into the console, bringing up surveillance photos. Specialized drones, larger than the security models you encountered at the mine. Each carries one of the canisters and can disperse the pathogen over a half-mile radius. Eleanor studied the images, noting details of the drone configuration. They've modified the canisters since we saw them at the first facility. More sophisticated dispersal system, probably designed for maximum aerosolization. What about Walker? Walsh asked, his voice tight with concern for his commander. Harrington's expression darkened. Our priority has to be stopping the attack. We cannot risk millions of lives even for one of our own. The room fell silent, the impossible weight of the decision hanging in the air. Eleanor understood the cold calculus of command, the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. But Walker was more than just another operator. He was their leader, their brother in arms. With respect, Admiral, she said, I believe we can do both. All eyes turned to her. The data from the production facility includes details on Petrov's security systems and communications protocols, even building schematics for his control center, she explained. If we move quickly with precision, we can rescue Walker and neutralize the bioweapon threat. Harrington studied her intently. You're proposing a direct assault on Petrov's headquarters when we know he's expecting us. Not an assault, Eleanor clarified. A surgical strike, small team, minimal footprint. While the main force creates a diversion at the secondary location we identified. She stood, ignoring the pain from her wounded leg, and moved to the tactical display. Petrov thinks he knows our playbook. He's expecting a full tactical response team's helicopters, the works. We give him that, but at the wrong location. Meanwhile, a small infiltration team hits the real target. Thompson nodded slowly, seeing the strategy. Classic misdirection. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. And there's one more thing working in our favor. Based on the communications logs Ramirez recovered, Petrov is hosting potential buyers tomorrow morning. Representatives from various terrorist organizations and rogue states. He'll be focused on preparing his demonstration, not expecting an immediate counterattack after our operation at the mine. Harrington considered the plan, his military mind assessing angles, contingencies, and risks. Finally, he nodded. Who do you want for the infiltration team? Walsh, Ramirez, and myself, Eleanor answered without hesitation. We've worked together. We know each other's capabilities. You're injured, Harrington pointed out. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. So was Walker when he carried me through gunfire in Mosul. Didn't stop him from completing the mission. A flash of something, perhaps respect, perhaps memory, crossed Harrington's face. Very well. Thompson and Brennan will coordinate the diversion with our tactical teams. He checked his watch. You have 2 hours for planning and prep. Wheels up at 2200. As the others moved to prepare, Harrington held Eleanor back with a hand on her arm. You remind me of your father, he said quietly. Same determination, same disregard for your own safety when others are in danger. His eyes held a warning. Don't let it cloud your judgment. Walker wouldn't want you to die trying to save him. Eleanor nodded, understanding both the compliment and the caution. We'll bring him home, sir, and we'll stop Petrov. See that you do, Harrington replied. The stakes have never been higher. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in the back of a modified Black Hawk helicopter, reviewing the mission parameters one last time. Her leg had been properly treated, the wound closed with a field surgical kit and numbed with a local anesthetic. It would hold for the duration of the operation it had to. Walsh sat across from her, methodically checking his weapons and demolition equipment. His massive hands capable of such destruction moved with surprising delicacy as he armed the specialized charges they would use to breach Petrov's security systems. Beside him, Ramirez calibrated the electronic countermeasures that would be crucial to their infiltration. His expression was focused and tense, but he looked up briefly and gave Eleanor a reassuring nod. They were as ready as they could be. The helicopter flight was conducted in near total darkness, using terrain-following systems to avoid radar detection. Eleanor used the time to center herself, controlling her breathing, focusing her mind on the task ahead. Every operation carried risk, but this one was different. The combination of a hostage rescue and stopping a WMD attack created pressures few missions ever faced. 5 minutes, the pilot's voice announced through their headsets. Eleanor checked her equipment one final time. Her new sidearm from Walsh was secured in a thigh holster. Her primary weapon, an MP7 submachine gun, hung from its sling across her chest. The specialized medical kit containing countermeasures for Petrov's bioweapon was strapped to her back. "Diversion team is in position," Ramirez reported, listening to updates through his communications gear. They begin their assault in exactly 7 minutes. The timing had to be perfect. The diversion would draw Petrov's attention and resources away from the main compound, creating the window they needed to infiltrate. The helicopter slowed, hovering momentarily before setting down in a small clearing 3 miles from Petrov's ranch. No lights, no sound beyond the whispering rotors as the team disembarked, moving quickly into the darkness. "Comms check," Eleanor whispered, activating her throat microphone. "Walsh clear. Ramirez clear." They moved through the desert with practiced efficiency, using the rugged terrain for cover. The night vision systems turned the darkness into shades of green, revealing a landscape of scrub brush, rocky outcroppings, and the occasional cactus, standing like a silent sentinel. At the 2-mile mark, Ramirez raised a fist, signaling them to halt. He unfolded a compact drone from his pack, programming it quickly before launching it into the night sky. The tiny aircraft would provide real-time surveillance of the target, allowing them to adapt to any changes in security patterns. "Drone feed online," he whispered, studying the small display screen. "I count 8 perimeter guards. 2 at the main entrance, 2 patrolling the grounds, 4 on the roof with what appear to be anti-aircraft weapons." "Expecting company from above," Walsh observed. "That supports our theory he's not looking for a ground approach." Eleanor studied the feed, noting details not immediately obvious. "The guards are wearing the same type of protective masks we saw at the medical facility. Petrov's taking no chances with his own bioweapon." "Smart," Ramirez said grimly. 3 minutes until diversion begins. We should get into position." They continued their approach, moving from shadow to shadow, every step calculated to avoid detection. When they reached the perimeter of Petrov's property, they took cover behind a low ridge overlooking the main compound. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared in satellite imagery, a sprawling structure with multiple wings and a central courtyard. Security lights illuminated the grounds, creating pools of brightness, surrounded by deep shadow. Guard dogs patrolled alongside their handlers, adding another layer of security to detect intruders. "The dogs complicate things," Walsh muttered. Eleanor removed a small canister from her vest. "Not if we use this. Special Forces chemical compound. Masks our scent." She sprayed each of them thoroughly, the fine mist leaving no visible residue, but effectively neutralizing their human odor. 30 seconds to diversion, Ramirez reported. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors grew steadily louder. Right on schedule, Thompson and Brennan would be leading the assault on the secondary location, creating maximum noise and visibility. The response at Petrov's compound was immediate. Alarms blared. Guards shouted commands. The anti-aircraft weapons on the roof rotated toward the sound of approaching helicopters. Within moments, 2 vehicles roared out of the compound garage, filled with armed men racing toward the perceived threat. "Now," Eleanor ordered, and the team moved. They approached from the blind side of the property, using the security system's focus on the aerial diversion to their advantage. When they reached the perimeter wall, Walsh attached a specialized charge designed to cut through concrete without creating a significant blast. The shaped explosion was barely audible, leaving a hole just large enough for them to squeeze through one at a time. Eleanor went first, her smaller frame making the tight passage slightly easier despite her injured leg. Once inside the compound grounds, they moved quickly between security camera blind spots that Ramirez had identified from the surveillance data. The plan called for them to enter through a service entrance on the building's west side, less heavily guarded than the main doors, especially now with resources diverted to the diversion. They encountered their first real obstacle at the service door, a guard who had remained at his post despite the commotion. Before he could raise an alarm, Walsh moved with surprising speed for his size, clamping a massive hand over the man's mouth while using his other arm to cut off blood flow to the brain with a precise chokehold. The guard slumped unconscious within seconds. "Zip tie him," Eleanor whispered, keeping watch while Walsh secured the unconscious man. Ramirez worked on the electronic lock, his fingers moving deftly across the keypad. "Security system is military grade. Give me 30 seconds. The distant sound of gunfire indicated the diversion was fully underway. They had perhaps 10 minutes before Petrov realized he was facing a feint rather than a main assault. The lock disengaged with a soft click and Ramirez eased the door open. The service corridor beyond was dimly lit and empty. According to the building schematics, Walker would likely be held in the basement level, an area designated for special research on the plans. They moved through the building like ghosts, encountering minimal resistance. Most of the security personnel had responded to the diversion, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Those they did encounter were quickly and quietly neutralized with non-lethal methods, chokeholds, sedative injections, precision, strikes to pressure points. When they reached the access door to the basement level, they faced another challenge. The security here was significantly higher biometric scanner, reinforced door camera coverage from multiple angles. "Can't bypass this one cleanly," Ramirez whispered after examining the system. Walsh prepared another breaching charge. "Then we do it loud." Eleanor nodded. "Once we breach, we'll have minutes at most before the entire compound goes on high alert. We find Walker secured in any bioweapon components, then extract immediately." "On my mark," Walsh said, setting the charge. 3, 2, 1. The explosion was controlled but significant, the reinforced door blowing inward with enough force to set off every alarm in the building. They moved through the smoke, weapons raised, encountering immediate resistance from guards stationed at the bottom of the stairs. Eleanor's training took over her movements fluid despite her injury. She dropped the first guard with a precise double tap to the center mass, then pivoted to engage the second. Walsh and Ramirez moved alongside her, their fire coordinated and devastating. The basement corridor branched in two directions. According to the schematics, the left led to the research facilities, the right to what was labeled as containment. "Walsh, take the research wing," Eleanor ordered. "Secure any bioweapon components or data. Ramirez with me." They split up, moving with the urgency of a rapidly closing window. Eleanor and Ramirez encountered two more guards outside what appeared to be a detention cell. The firefight was brief but intense, both hostiles dropping under their coordinated fire. The cell door was locked with a conventional deadbolt rather than electronic systems. Eleanor stepped back, aiming her weapon at the lock mechanism. "Stand clear," she warned Ramirez, then fired twice. The lock shattered, the door swinging open under Ramirez's push. Inside, they found Walker. He was strapped to a metal chair, his face bloodied and swollen from what had clearly been intensive interrogation. His tactical vest had been removed, his shirt torn open to expose bruises and what appeared to be burn marks on his chest. Despite his condition, his eyes opened at their entrance, recognition and relief washing over his features. "About damn time," he managed, his voice hoarse. Eleanor moved quickly to his side, checking his vital signs while Ramirez cut through his restraints. "Can you walk?" she asked, assessing his injuries with professional detachment, despite the anger burning in her chest at what had been done to him. Walker nodded, grimacing, as he stood with Ramirez's support. "Didn't tell them anything," he said, his voice stronger now. "Petrov wanted to know how much we'd discovered about his operation, about the demonstration." "We know enough," Eleanor assured him, handing him her sidearm. "We've destroyed the production facility. Now we need to neutralize the delivery systems and any remaining pathogen." "The drones," Walker said urgently. "They're in the main hangar, north side of the compound. Petrov was there when they brought me in, programming flight paths for tomorrow's attack." Eleanor's radio crackled. "Reynolds, this is Walsh. You need to see this. Research Wing Room 3. Copy, she replied. We have Walker. Moving to your position. They helped Walker through the corridors, his strength returning gradually as they moved. When they reached the research wing, they found Walsh standing in a laboratory filled with sophisticated equipment and computer systems. But it wasn't the technology that had prompted Walsh's call. It was what was displayed on the main monitor, a satellite image of Fort Huachuca with a countdown timer showing less than 30 minutes. He moved up the timeline, Walsh said grimly. The diversion didn't just fail to distract him, it convinced him to accelerate the demonstration. Eleanor felt cold dread settling in her stomach. How many drones are prepped for launch? According to this, Walsh indicated a deployment schedule on a secondary monitor. 3 primary drones carrying the bioweapon canisters plus 6 escort drones armed with conventional explosives to counter any defensive measures. Walker leaned heavily against a lab table. We need to warn Fort Huachuca immediately. Full evacuation protocols. Ramirez was already working on the communications system, trying to establish a secure channel now. While he worked, Eleanor studied the lab, taking in details that might help them stop the attack. Her gaze fell on a set of electronic key cards labeled Master Override in both English and Russian. These might give us control of the drones, she said, pocketing the cards. We need to get to that hangar. The building shook suddenly, the lights flickering as the sound of distant explosions reached them. Sounds like Thompson and Brennan brought the party here, Walsh observed. Perfect timing, Eleanor replied. The chaos will cover our movement to the hangar. They made their way through corridors now filling with smoke from the external attack. The diversion force had clearly realized the secondary location was a decoy and had redirected to Petrov's actual headquarters. Explosions and gunfire created a cacophony of battle throughout the compound. When they reached the ground floor, Eleanor spotted a side exit that would give them the most direct path to the hangar. They emerged into Chaos helicopter gunships engaging with the anti-aircraft emplacements on the roof, special forces teams deploying across the grounds, vehicles burning. There, Walker pointed to a large structure on the north side of the property. That's the hangar. They moved as quickly as Walker's condition allowed, using the combat around them as cover for their approach. When they reached the hangar doors, they found them sealed with an electronic security system. No time for finesse, Eleanor decided, nodding to Walsh. He placed another breaching charge, the team taking cover as the explosion ripped through the locking mechanism. The heavy doors buckled inward, allowing them access to the cavernous space beyond. Inside was a scene of frantic activity. Technicians worked urgently to prepare the drones for launch, while Petrov himself stood at a control console directing the operation. When the doors exploded, he spun around, his aged face contorting with rage at the sight of the intruders. "Kill them!" he shouted to the armed guards stationed throughout the hangar. The team dove for cover as gunfire erupted around them. Eleanor found herself behind a stack of metal crates, Walsh beside her, while Ramirez and Walker took position behind a vehicle parked near the entrance. "We need to disable those drones," Eleanor called over the gunfire. "The launch bay doors are already opening." Above them, the hangar roof was retracting, revealing the night sky, the drone's exit path for their deadly mission. Walsh nodded grimly. "Cover me." Before Eleanor could object, he was moving using his bulk and surprising speed to charge toward the nearest drone platform. She provided covering fire, her MP7 shattering, as she forced the guards to keep their heads down. Walsh reached the first drone, a large model with the distinctive canister of biological agent mounted underneath. He worked quickly, attaching a specialized explosive charge designed to destroy the electronics without rupturing the bioweapon container. Across the hangar, Walker and Ramirez were engaged in their own firefight, gradually working their way toward the control console, where Petrov stood shouting orders with increasing desperation as his launch window narrowed. Eleanor spotted a clear path to the second drone and took it, ignoring the burning pain in her wounded leg as she sprinted across open ground. Bullets kicked up sparks from the concrete floor around her, but she reached the platform, sliding into cover behind its landing struts. The drone was already powering up, its rotors beginning to spin. Working quickly, Eleanor attached a charge identical to the one Walsh had used, setting the timer for 30 seconds. She had to reach the third drone before any of them could launch. Across the hangar, she saw Walsh engaged in hand-to-hand combat with 2 guards, his massive fists devastating against opponents who had lost their firearms in the close quarters struggle. Ramirez was pinned down by gunfire from an elevated position, while Walker had somehow acquired an assault rifle and was providing suppressive fire from behind a forklift. Eleanor spotted the third drone on the far side of the hangar. Between her and it stood Petrov himself, now holding a pistol and looking directly at her. Their eyes met across the battlefield, mutual recognition and hatred flaring. "You," he snarled, raising his weapon. Eleanor dove as he fired the bullet, grazing her shoulder. She rolled back to her feet, returning fire with her MP7, forcing Petrov to take cover behind the control console. The first drone exploded as Walsh's charge detonated the concussive force, temporarily disrupting the battle as everyone instinctively ducked. Eleanor used the moment to sprint toward the third drone, ignoring Petrov's wild shots in her direction. She reached the platform just as the drone's engines reached full power. It was rising, preparing for launch. In a desperate move, she leaped upward, catching hold of the drone's landing strut as it lifted off the ground. The drone continued to rise, carrying Eleanor with it toward the open roof. She hung on with one hand while fumbling for her last explosive charge with the other. Below, the chaos of battle continued, Walsh fighting his way toward the control console, Ramirez finally breaking from cover to flank Petrov's position, Walker providing covering fire despite his injuries. 20 feet above the hangar floor, now Eleanor managed to attach the charge to the drone's central housing. She set the timer for 10 seconds, just enough time to let go and drop back to the ground before detonation. As she released her grip and fell, we saw the second drone explode from her earlier charge. Only this one remained. She hit the concrete floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact, but still feeling something tear in her already wounded leg. The pain was blinding, but Eleanor forced herself to crawl toward cover as the third drone continued to rise toward the opening in the roof. 3 seconds. 2. The explosion was perfect, contained enough to destroy the drone's systems without rupturing the bioweapon canister. The disabled aircraft plummeted back to the hangar floor, crashing into a stack of equipment with a satisfying crunch of metal and electronics. Eleanor allowed herself one moment of relief before turning her attention back to the battle. Walsh had reached the control console and was engaged in brutal combat with Petrov's personal guards. Ramirez was providing covering fire from a flanking position. Walker was nowhere to be seen. Then she spotted him. He had somehow circled behind Petrov and was now just feet away from the Russian scientist, his weapon raised. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the cold fury in Walker's eyes, the righteous anger of a man who had suffered torture at this man's hands, who had seen comrades used as test subjects for horrific weapons. "Walker," she called out, uncertain if he could even hear her over the cacophony of battle. "We need him alive." Whether he heard or simply reached the same conclusion independently, Walker adjusted his aim and fired. The bullet struck Petrov in the leg, dropping him to the ground with a scream of pain and rage. The tide of battle shifted quickly after that. With all 3 bioweapon drones disabled and Petrov captured, the remaining resistance began to crumble. The special forces teams that had been engaging outside now breached the hangar from multiple points, overwhelming the last pockets of resistance. Eleanor limped her way across the hangar floor to where Walker stood over Petrov, keeping his weapon trained on the wounded scientist. "The canisters are secure," she reported. "Containment teams are on their way to handle the bioagent safely." Walker nodded, his eyes never leaving Petrov. "It was never about ideology for you, was it?" he asked the Russian. "Just profit, selling the perfect weapon to the highest bidder." Petrov glared up at them, defiant despite his wound. "You think you've won? This was just one facility, one demonstration. The research exists in multiple locations. Others will continue my work." "Maybe," Eleanor conceded, "but you won't be around to see it, and the intelligence we've gathered will help us find those other facilities, those other researchers." Medical teams and security personnel flooded the hangar, now taking control of prisoners, securing weapons, establishing containment protocols for the bioweapon canisters. Eleanor found herself suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried her through the mission beginning to fade, allowing the pain of her injuries to resurge with brutal intensity. Walsh appeared at her side, supporting her as her wounded leg threatened to buckle. "Might want to sit down before you fall down, Doc," he suggested, his own face bloodied from the fighting, but his eyes bright with the satisfaction of mission accomplished. "Good advice," she admitted, allowing him to help her to a nearby crate. A medic approached immediately, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her pant leg to examine the reopened wound. Ramirez joined them, his tactical gear scorched from an explosion, but otherwise appearing relatively unharmed. "Fort Huachuca confirms they received our warning. Full containment protocols were initiated. No casualties." Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her. They had done it, stopped the attack, captured Petrov, secured the bioweapon. Across the hangar, she watched as Walker supervised Petrov's detention, ensuring the Russian scientist was securely handcuffed to a medical gurney before allowing paramedics to treat his leg wound. Despite his own injuries, Walker remained the consummate professional, the mission commander seeing things through to completion. Admiral Harrington arrived 30 minutes later, helicopter landing outside the now secured compound. He moved directly to where Eleanor sat receiving medical attention, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Situation report," he demanded. "All 3 bioweapon drones neutralized," Eleanor replied. "Petrov in custody, research data secured, Walker rescued, mission accomplished, sir." Harrington studied her for a long moment, then nodded once the closest thing to praise she was likely to receive from the stoic admiral. "Good work, Reynolds." He glanced at her injured leg where medics were preparing her for transport. "Now get yourself to a hospital before you bleed out on my operation." "Yes, sir," she replied, managing a small smile despite the pain. As they loaded her into a medical helicopter, Walker appeared at her side. He looked terrible, face bruised, movements stiff from his injuries, but his eyes held a calm certainty that they had done what needed to be done. "Looks like I owe you one," he said, clasping her hand briefly. "Told you that you'd fit right in with this team." "Just returning the favor from Mosul," she replied. "Rest up," Walker instructed. "We've got more work to do once Petrov starts talking." "This isn't over." Eleanor nodded, knowing he was right. Petrov's network was extensive. The bioweapon research could be recreated. There would be other threats, other missions. As the helicopter lifted off, she gazed down at the compound below, now swarming with military personnel securing the site. In the distance, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the desert horizon, a new day made possible by their actions through the night. Eleanor closed her eyes, allowing exhaustion to finally claim her. There would be debriefings, medical evaluations, new assignments. But for now, in this moment, they had won. They had stopped an attack that could have killed thousands. They had brought Walker home. They had done their job. And sometimes in their line of work, that was the only victory that mattered, doing what needed to be done, regardless of the cost. Eleanor had learned that lesson from her father, had seen it exemplified in Walker, had now lived it herself. As consciousness faded, her last thought was of the team: Walsh, Ramirez, Thompson, Brennan, and Walker. No longer questioning her presence among them, no longer seeing her as an outsider. She had proven herself not just as a medic, but as an operator, a warrior in her own right. She was one of them now, and whatever came next, they would face it together.